My name is Helen O'Sullivan, and I'm 64 years old now. I've spent most of my life taking care of people, first as a daughter, then as a wife, as a mother, and for decades as a nurse. I wore myself thin, making sure everyone else was okay, that everyone else had what they needed. I thought that's what love looked like. I thought sacrifice was the same as being valued. But there's something you learn when you give everything away. Not everyone appreciates it. Some people mistake your kindness for weakness. They see your open hands and think you have nothing left to hold on to. I want to tell you about the day everything changed for me. It was at my son's college graduation party. The house was full of people, his friends, our relatives, neighbors I'd known for years. I'd spent 3 days preparing food, decorating, making sure everything was perfect for him. I was so proud. He'd worked hard, and I'd worked even harder to make sure he could focus on his studies without worrying about money or anything else. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard him. He was talking to his friends in the living room, his voice loud with that particular cruelty young people sometimes have when they're trying to impress each other. "Yeah, my mom's a nurse," he said, and then he laughed. A public failure, really, never amounted to much. The room went quiet. Someone tried to change the subject. But those words hung in the air like smoke. I stood there with a plate of food in my hands, smiling. I've gotten good at smiling through pain. It's a skill you develop when you're a woman, when you're a mother, when you're someone who's always putting everyone else first. But that night, something inside me shifted. And the next morning, I made a phone call that would change both of our lives forever. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. To understand why that moment mattered so much, you need to know where I came from. You need to know the whole story, all the years of giving, all the years of being overlooked, and all the strength I didn't know I had until I finally needed it. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, I hope you'll stay with me. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest stories to tell. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was born in 1961 in a small town in Massachusetts, the youngest of 4 children and the only girl. My father worked at the steel mill, and my mother took in sewing to make ends meet. We didn't have much, but we had enough. At least, that's what my mother always said. From the time I could walk, I understood my place in the family. My brothers could be loud, could demand attention, could leave their clothes on the floor and their dishes in the sink. But I was expected to be different. "Helen, help your mother. Helen, watch your brothers. Helen, be good." I learned early that being good meant being quiet. It meant anticipating what people needed before they asked. It meant making myself smaller, so others could be bigger. My mother was a hard woman, worn down by years of struggle. She loved us, I think, but she didn't know how to show it except through work. She taught me to cook and clean, and sew. She taught me that a woman's value came from what she could do for others. "Nobody's going to want a lazy wife," she'd tell me as I scrubbed the kitchen floor on my hands and knees. I was a good student, always brought home decent grades. I liked reading and math, and my teachers sometimes said I could go to college if I wanted. But when I mentioned it to my father, he laughed. "College? What for? You'll just get married anyway." My mother nodded in agreement, and that was the end of that conversation. My brothers all had dreams. Tommy wanted to be a mechanic. Patrick talked about joining the Navy. Even little Jimmy, just 2 years older than me, said he'd go to trade school. Everyone encouraged them. But when I talked about becoming a teacher, my mother said, "That's nice, dear," and then asked me to start dinner. I turned 16 in 1977. That was the year I met Sean O'Sullivan at a church social. He was 19, tall, and handsome, with dark hair and blue eyes that made my heart race. He paid attention to me in a way no one else ever had. He asked me questions about myself. He laughed at my jokes. He made me feel like I mattered. We dated for a year, always with a chaperone, always proper. He worked construction and saved his money. He told me he wanted a family, a home, a life built on solid ground. He didn't promise me romance or adventure. He promised me stability, and at 17, that felt like love. My parents approved. My mother started planning a wedding before he'd even proposed. When he finally did ask me to marry him, on a cold November evening in 1978, I said yes without hesitation. I was 17 years old, and I thought I was making a smart decision. I thought I was securing my future. We got married in the spring of 1979, just after my 18th birthday. It was a small ceremony at our church, followed by a reception in the parish hall. I wore my mother's altered wedding dress and carried daisies. Sean looked nervous, but happy. Everyone told me how lucky I was. The first year of marriage was an adjustment. Sean worked long hours, and I took a job as a cashier at the grocery store. We rented a small apartment above a pharmacy in town. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I thought I was happy. I thought this was what life was supposed to look like. But slowly, I started to notice things. Sean didn't ask me about my day anymore. When I tried to talk about my dreams, maybe taking some classes, maybe learning something new, he'd change the subject or tell me we couldn't afford it. His attention, which had once made me feel so special, had moved on to other things. Work, friends, beer. I got pregnant in the winter of 1980. I was 19 years old and terrified. I'd never been around babies much, and suddenly I was going to be responsible for a whole human life. When I told Sean, he seemed pleased but distant, like I'd just told him we were having pot roast for dinner. My mother was thrilled, though. Suddenly she was calling me every day, giving me advice I didn't ask for, telling me stories about her own pregnancies that made me even more anxious. She started buying baby clothes and blankets, taking over the preparations in that way she had of making everything about her competence and my inadequacy. The pregnancy was hard. I was sick constantly those first few months, and Sean grew irritated with me. My mother worked in the fields when she was pregnant. He'd say, as if that was supposed to make me feel better. I still went to my job at the grocery store every day, standing on swollen feet for 8 hours, smiling at customers who never looked me in the eye. Our son was born in August 1981. We named him Connor. He had Sean's dark hair and my green eyes, and when they placed him in my arms, I felt a love so fierce it scared me. This tiny person depended on me completely. I would do anything for him. I would be anything for him. But along with that love came an exhaustion I'd never known. Connor didn't sleep well. He cried constantly, and nothing I did seemed to help. Sean worked longer hours to make extra money, which meant I was alone with the baby most of the time. My mother came over occasionally, but mostly to criticize how I was doing things. You're holding him wrong. You're feeding him too much. You're spoiling him. I was 20 years old and drowning. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, who saved me. She was an older woman, a widow whose own children were grown. She'd hear Connor crying through the thin walls of our apartment and would knock on my door with soup or tea. She didn't give advice. She just sat with me while I cried, held the baby while I took a shower, told me I was doing better than I thought. Being a mother is the hardest job in the world, she said once, but you're stronger than you know. I didn't believe her then. I felt weak and useless and overwhelmed. But her words stayed with me. When Connor was 18 months old, I got pregnant again. It wasn't planned. I was barely managing with one child, and now there would be two. Sean seemed annoyed, like I'd done this on purpose to inconvenience him. My mother said, "Well, at least you'll get them both raised at the same time." Our second son, Brendan, was born in March 1983. He was an easier baby than Connor, but having two small children and a husband who was rarely home broke something in me. I stopped being a person and became a function. I was a feeding machine, a cleaning machine, a laundry machine. I existed only to serve the needs of others. Sean, and I barely spoke anymore except about logistics. Did we need milk? Was the rent paid? Could I keep the kids quiet when he was trying to watch TV? The man who had once made me feel special now looked at me like I was furniture. One night, after both boys were finally asleep, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I was 22 years old, and I looked 40. My eyes were hollow. My hair was unwashed. I'd lost myself so completely I didn't even know who I was anymore. That's when I made a decision. I needed to do something for myself, something that would give me back some sense of purpose beyond being someone's mother and someone's wife. Mrs. Chun had told me about a nursing program at the community college. Night classes, affordable, practical. When I told Sean, he was against it. "Who's going to watch the kids?" he asked. "When are you going to have time? We can't afford it." But for once, I didn't back down. "I need this," I told him. "I need to do something that's mine." He wasn't happy, but he eventually agreed. I think he realized I'd reached a breaking point. In the fall of 1983, at 22 years old, I started taking classes to become a nurse. It was the first thing I'd ever done, just for myself. Nursing school saved my life. That's not an exaggeration. It gave me a reason to get up in the morning beyond the endless cycle of diapers and dishes. It reminded me that I had a mind, that I could learn, that I was capable of more than I'd been told. The program was brutal. I'd work all day taking care of the boys, wait until Sean got home, then drive to the community college for evening classes. I'd get home around 10, study until midnight, then wake up at 6 to do it all over again. I was exhausted, constantly running on coffee and determination, but I loved it. I loved learning about the human body, about medicine, about how to help people. I loved that I was good at it, that my teachers praised my work, that I scored high on tests. For the first time in my life, I felt competent. I felt valuable in a way that wasn't tied to what I could do for my family. Sean resented it. He'd complained that dinner wasn't ready on time, that the house was messy, that I wasn't paying enough attention to him. But I'd stopped caring about his approval. I'd spent years trying to make him happy, and nothing had ever been enough. This was mine. The boys were young enough that they didn't really understand what I was doing. Connor, who was 2 when I started, just knew that sometimes Mama left at night. Brendan was still a baby. But Mrs. Chun helped me, watching them when Sean had to work late. She became like a second mother to me, the kind of mother who believed in me instead of diminishing me. I graduated from the nursing program in 1985. I was 24 years old, and when they called my name at the ceremony, I walked across that stage with tears streaming down my face. My mother was in the audience, and she smiled, but I could tell she didn't really understand why this mattered so much to me. Sean was there too, but he looked bored. Only Mrs. Chun seemed to grasp what an accomplishment this was. I got a job at the county hospital working night shifts in the emergency room. The hours were hard, but the pay was better than I'd ever made, and I was finally using my education. I loved the work. I loved the fast pace, the problem solving, the feeling of making a real difference in people's lives. My patients trusted me. They held my hand during difficult procedures. They thanked me for being gentle, for listening, for caring. At work, I wasn't invisible. At work, I mattered. At home, things were deteriorating. Sean started drinking more. He'd come home from work and go straight for the beer, sitting in front of the TV until he fell asleep. We barely spoke. We certainly didn't touch. The marriage had become a business arrangement. We lived in the same house and raised the same children, but there was no love left. I don't think there ever really had been, not the deep kind. We'd been two young people looking for stability, and we'd mistaken that for something more. The boys were growing. Connor started kindergarten in 1986, and I realized with a shock that he was 5 years old already. Where had the time gone? Brendan was 3, still small and sweet. I tried to be present with them, but I was working 40 hours a week on night shifts, which meant I slept during the day while they were at school or with a babysitter. I was providing for them financially in ways Sean couldn't. My nursing salary was actually higher than what he made in construction. But I was missing moments, school events, playground afternoons, bedtime stories. The guilt ate at me constantly. Was I being selfish? Should I have just stayed home like my mother expected? But then I'd remember what it felt like before nursing school, when I was drowning in the endless monotony of housework and childcare, when I'd lost myself so completely I couldn't find a way back. And I knew that working, having my own career, having my own purpose, that made me a better mother. Even if I wasn't there for every moment, when I was there, I was fully there. I was a whole person. In 1987, Mrs. Chun died. She had a heart attack in her sleep, peaceful and quick. I found out when the landlord knocked on my door to tell me. I sat down on the floor and sobbed. She'd been the only person who truly believed in me, who saw me as more than just a supporting character in someone else's story. At her funeral, her daughter came up to me. "My mother talked about you all the time," she said. "She was so proud of you, of what you'd accomplished. She said you reminded her of herself when she was young." That broke me. Mrs. Chun had survived immigration, widowhood, raising children in a country where she barely spoke the language. She'd been strong in ways I was only beginning to understand, and she'd seen that same strength in me. The early 90s were a blur of work and worry. Connor was in middle school, going through all the awkwardness and anger that comes with being a teenage boy. Brendan was in elementary school, quieter than his brother, but struggling academically. And Sean was disappearing into a bottle more and more often. His drinking had gone from a few beers after work to something darker. He'd come home drunk, sometimes belligerent, sometimes just sad. He never hit me or the boys, but his words could cut deep. "You think you're so much better than me now," he'd say, "with your nursing job and your paycheck. You think I'm not enough." The truth was, I didn't think about him much at all anymore. I'd checked out of our marriage emotionally years ago. We were roommates, nothing more. But I stayed because divorce felt impossible. My mother would be horrified. The church wouldn't approve. And what would people think? At work, I was thriving. I'd moved from the ER to the cardiac unit, and I loved the longer-term relationships I built with patients. I held their hands through scary diagnoses. I celebrated with them when they got to go home. I cried with their families when we lost them. One of my patients, an older man named Arthur, told me something I've never forgotten. He was dying of heart failure, and he knew it. One night, when his family had gone home and it was just the two of us, he said, "Helen, can I give you some advice?" "Of course," I said. "Don't waste your life on people who don't see your value," he said. I spent 40 years in a marriage where I felt like a paycheck and a handyman. My wife didn't love me, not really. We were just stuck. And now I'm dying. And all I can think about is all the years I could have spent being happy instead of being comfortable. He died 3 days later. His words haunted me. By 1995, Connor was 14 and full of teenage rage. He yelled at me for everything, for working too much, for embarrassing him. for existing. I understood it was normal teenage behavior, but it hurt. I'd sacrificed so much for him, and he treated me like I was nothing. Brendan, 12, was different. He was sensitive and artistic, spending hours drawing in his sketchbooks. But he struggled in school, and his teachers kept suggesting he might have learning disabilities. Sean refused to get him tested. "There's nothing wrong with him," he'd say. "He's just lazy." But I knew better. I got Brendan evaluated, and yes, he had dyslexia. With the right support, he could succeed. But it cost money: tutors, special programs, therapy. I paid for all of it with my nursing salary. Sean contributed nothing and complained about everything. That's when I started planning for the future in ways I'd never done before. I started saving money in an account Sean didn't know about. Not a lot, $20 or $50 whenever I could manage it. But it added up over time. I also started investing in property. It started almost by accident. A colleague at the hospital was selling her mother's house after she died, and she offered it to me at a good price. It was a small place, needed work, but it was in a decent neighborhood. I used my savings for the down payment and rented it out. The rental income covered the mortgage and gave me a little extra each month. Sean didn't know about any of this. I kept it separate, kept it mine. Some voice inside me, maybe Mrs. Chen's, maybe my own, told me I needed to protect myself. I needed to have something that couldn't be taken away. Over the next few years, I bought 2 more properties. Small houses, fixer-uppers that I could afford. I learned about real estate, about tax advantages, about building equity. It became a hobby, a secret project that was entirely mine. By 2000, I owned 3 rental properties worth more than our family home. But I never told anyone, not my mother, not my friends, not Sean, not the boys. It was my insurance policy, my exit strategy, my proof that I was capable of more than anyone had ever expected of me. Connor went to college in 1999, choosing a school 4 hours away. I was proud of him, even though he barely thanked me for the financial support I provided. Sean contributed almost nothing. His income had decreased as his drinking increased. But I worked extra shifts, pulled from my savings, made sure Connor had what he needed. Brendan graduated high school in 2001 and decided to take a year off before college. He worked at a bookstore and pursued his art. He was kinder than his brother, more aware of my sacrifices, but still, I was just mom. I was the person who was supposed to make everything work. In 2003, something shifted in me. I was 42 years old, and I looked at my life and realized I'd spent over 2 decades being someone's something, someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's nurse. But who was I? What did I want? What would make me happy? I couldn't answer those questions. I'd spent so long not asking them that I didn't even know where to start. Sean and I hadn't had a real conversation in years. We occupied the same space but lived separate lives. He drank every night now, sometimes to the point of passing out on the couch. His health was suffering. He'd gained weight. His face was red and bloated. His hands shook in the mornings. I tried to talk to him about it once. "Sean, you need help. Your drinking is out of control." He turned on me. With such venom, I stepped back. "Don't you dare lecture me. You're never here anyway. You're always at that damn hospital or dealing with those houses you think I don't know about." So he did know, or suspected. My heart raced, but I kept my voice calm. "Those properties are investments. They're our security. They're your way of planning to leave me," he said. And maybe he was right. I saw a lawyer that summer quietly during my lunch break. He explained divorce laws, asset division, what I could expect. With my separate properties and the documentation I'd kept, I'd be in a good position. But I wasn't ready yet. Something held me back. Fear, maybe, or habit, or that old voice telling me that good women don't give up. Connor graduated from college in 2003 with a degree in business. He got a job in the city, started making decent money. I was proud of him, proud that he'd accomplished what I never got to do. But he'd grown into a young man who took things for granted, who didn't understand struggle, who'd never had to fight for anything because I'd made sure his path was smooth. Brendan enrolled in art school in 2002, and I helped pay for that too. He was talented, truly gifted, and watching him pursue his passion brought me joy. At least one of my sons seemed to appreciate what I'd done for him. In 2004, my mother died. She was 83, and it was peaceful. At her funeral, my brothers talked about what a strong woman she'd been, how she'd held the family together, how she'd sacrificed so much. And I thought, yes, she had. But she'd also taught me that sacrifice was the same as love, and she'd been wrong about that. After her death, I inherited a small amount of money. Not much, but enough. And I made a decision. I filed for divorce in January 2005. I was 43 years old, and I was done pretending. Sean was shocked, then angry, then pathetic. He begged me to reconsider, promised he'd change, swore he'd stop drinking. But I'd heard it all before, and I didn't believe him anymore. More importantly, I didn't care. I didn't love him. I wasn't even sure I liked him. We'd become strangers who shared a history, and that wasn't enough reason to stay. The divorce was finalized in September 2005. Because of my separate properties and assets, I came out of it in good financial shape. I kept the rental properties, gave Sean the house we'd lived in, split the rest fairly. He was bitter about it, told the boys I was abandoning him, painted himself as the victim. Connor took his father's side. "You're breaking up the family," he said, as if the family hadn't been broken for years. Brendan was more understanding, but even he seemed confused about why I couldn't just stick it out. I moved into one of my rental properties, a small 2-bedroom house that I'd recently renovated. It was the first time in my life I'd lived alone, and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I painted the walls colors I liked. I bought furniture that was mine. I ate dinner at 9 p.m. if I felt like it. I watched what I wanted on TV. I existed for myself, and it felt like coming up for air after being underwater for 24 years. But I was lonely too. My sons barely spoke to me. My brothers thought I'd made a mistake. My friends from church were uncomfortable around me. Divorced women disrupted their sense of order. I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts, volunteering for the hardest cases. At the hospital, I was valued. At home, I was just figuring out who Helen O'Sullivan was when she wasn't being defined by her relationships to other people. The years after my divorce were transformative. For the first time in my life, I had space to breathe, to think, to become someone beyond caretaker and provider. I was in my mid-40s, and it felt like I was finally growing up. I continued working as a cardiac nurse, but I also expanded my real estate investments. I bought 2 more properties, learned how to manage renovations, how to deal with contractors, how to screen tenants. It turned out I was good at business, good at making decisions, good at seeing potential where others saw problems. My relationship with Connor remained strained. He'd graduated college and was working in finance, making more money than I'd ever seen. He bought a condo in the city, drove a nice car, wore expensive suits. He was successful by any measure, but there was a coldness to him that worried me. He rarely called, and when he did, it was usually because he wanted something, advice about a work situation, help with some connection I might have. He never asked how I was doing. He never acknowledged the years I'd worked myself to exhaustion to make sure he had opportunities I'd never had. Brendan was different. He'd graduated from art school, and was working as a graphic designer while pursuing his painting on the side. He struggled financially, and I helped him when I could, but he was doing what he loved, and that mattered more than money. He called me regularly, invited me to his art shows, seemed genuinely interested in my life. "Mom, you seem happy," he said to me once over coffee. "Happier than I remember you being when I was growing up." I told him. "I'm finally living for myself instead of through other people." He nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand that now, why you left Dad. I was angry at first, but I get it. You deserved better." Those words meant more to me than he probably realized. In 2008, the economy crashed. Real estate values plummeted, and many of my friends lost their investments. But I'd been careful, had bought within my means, had solid tenants. I survived the downturn, even managed to buy another property at a depressed price. By 2010, I owned 6 rental properties, all profitable. My nursing salary combined with my rental income meant I was more financially secure than I'd ever been. I'd built this myself, without help, without recognition, without anyone even knowing what I was doing. I traveled for the first time in my life. I went to Ireland to see the village my great-grandparents had come from. I went to Italy and walked through museums full of art that made me cry. I went to the Grand Canyon and stood at the edge, feeling small and infinite at the same time. At work, I was promoted to charge nurse, leading my unit, mentoring younger nurses. I'd spent 30 years caring for others, and I was good at it. My patients loved me. My colleagues respected me. I'd built a career that mattered. But my sons were a constant source of heartache. Connor got engaged in 2012 to a woman named Amanda. She was nice enough, worked in marketing, came from money. But Connor never invited me to meet her family. When I asked about the wedding plans, he was vague. "We'll let you know," he said. The wedding was small, he told me later. Just immediate family and close friends. I wasn't invited. He claimed they wanted to keep it intimate, but I knew the truth. I embarrassed him. His working-class mother, the nurse, didn't fit the image he was trying to project. That hurt more than the divorce, more than anything Sean had ever said or done. My own son was ashamed of me. Brendan tried to mediate, told Connor he was being cruel, but Connor didn't change. He and Amanda bought a house in the suburbs, started their lives together, and I watched from a distance. I poured myself into my work and my properties and my travels. I made peace with the idea that I might not have the relationship I'd hoped for with my oldest son. I'd done everything I could for him. His choices were his own. In 2014, Connor and Amanda had a baby, a little girl they named Emily. I became a grandmother, and for a brief moment, I hoped this might bring us closer. But Connor limited my access, always had excuses for why I couldn't visit. Amanda's mother got to babysit regularly. I got an occasional supervised visit. I held my granddaughter and felt a familiar ache, the same fierce love I'd felt when my own sons were born, mixed with the knowledge that I'd have only a small place in her life. By 2015, I was 54 years old. I'd been nursing for over 30 years, and my body was starting to feel it. The long shifts, the physical demands of the job, the emotional weight of caring for dying patients, it was taking its toll. I started thinking about retirement, about what I wanted the next chapter of my life to look like. I had my rental properties, which generated steady income. I had savings. I could stop working if I wanted to and be comfortable. Connor had climbed the corporate ladder, gotten promotion after promotion. He'd moved to a bigger house in a prestigious neighborhood. He drove a luxury car and took expensive vacations. He posted it all on social media, living his best life for everyone to see. What nobody knew, what he never acknowledged, was that I'd made it all possible. The college education I'd paid for, the connections I'd helped him make through my hospital network when he was job hunting, the down payment assistance I'd given him for his first condo, the money I'd sent when he was between jobs and too proud to ask directly. He acted like he'd done it all himself. Self-made. Pulled himself up by his bootstraps. And maybe he believed it. Maybe he'd convinced himself that my contributions didn't matter, that any mother would do the same, that he didn't owe me anything. In 2015, Connor announced he was going to get his MBA, a prestigious program, executive track, very expensive. He told me about it, casually mentioned the tuition costs, and I knew what he was doing. He was asking for money without actually asking. And I gave it to him. I always did. I paid half his tuition, told myself it was an investment in his future. He thanked me, but there was no real gratitude in it. It was expected. Of course Mom would help. That's what she's for. Brendan, meanwhile, had finally started getting recognition for his art. He had a show at a real gallery, sold several paintings for significant money, was building a name for himself. He invited me to the opening, introduced me to everyone as my mom, who supported my dreams even when nobody else did. That meant everything. But Connor was becoming someone I didn't recognize. He was ambitious to the point of ruthlessness, cold in his calculations, obsessed with appearances. He'd learned to network, to schmooze, to say whatever people wanted to hear. He'd become successful, but at what cost? In the spring of 2015, Connor invited me to lunch. It was unusual. We hardly ever spent time alone together. I thought maybe he wanted to apologize for his distance. Maybe he'd finally matured enough to appreciate what I'd done for him. Instead, he wanted to talk about his father. Sean had been struggling financially, was behind on his mortgage, might lose the house. Connor thought I should help him. Help him. I said, Connor, I worked myself to death for years supporting this family while your father drank away his paychecks. I gave him the house in the divorce. If he's in financial trouble now, that's his responsibility, not mine. Connor's face hardened. He's still my father. You shouldn't have left him. You broke up our family. I saved myself, I said quietly. And I saved both of you from watching your mother disappear completely. He didn't understand. He couldn't. He'd never had to sacrifice anything, never had to fight for his own identity, never had to choose between his own survival and someone else's comfort. We finished lunch in tense silence. As we were leaving, he said, You know, Mom, not everyone thinks nursing is some noble profession. Some people might say you never really amounted to much. His words sliced through me, but I kept my face neutral. Is that what you think? He shrugged, already checking his phone. I'm just saying, maybe if you'd been more ambitious, more focused on building something bigger, you'd have more to show for your life. I went home and cried for the first time in years. Not because his words hurt, though they did, but because I'd raised a son who thought success was measured only in money and status, who couldn't see the value in a life spent caring for others. Connor finished his MBA in 2016. He graduated with honors, got another promotion, moved to an even bigger house. He was 35 years old and had everything he'd ever wanted. He decided to throw a graduation party in June of 2016. Not a small gathering. A full event with catered food, an open bar, all his colleagues and friends and family. He rented a venue, hired a DJ, went all out. He invited me, and I was surprised. Maybe this was his way of trying to bridge the gap between us. Maybe he wanted to include me in his success. I spent days preparing. I bought a new dress, got my hair done, brought an expensive gift. I arrived at the party nervous but hopeful. The venue was beautiful, full of people in designer clothes drinking expensive wine. I felt out of place immediately, but I tried to mingle, to smile, to be proud of my son. Connor was in his element, working the room, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. Amanda was at his side, perfectly dressed and smiling. My granddaughter Emily, now 2 years old, was there with a nanny. I barely got to hold her. A few hours into the party, I was standing near the kitchen area, watching Connor with a group of his friends. They were young, successful, confident. I felt invisible, but that was nothing new. Then I heard him laugh, loud and sharp. "Yeah, my mom's here somewhere," he said to his friends. "She's a nurse. Nice enough, but never really amounted to much. Kind of a public failure, if I'm honest." The group went quiet. Someone tried to change the subject. But Connor kept going, emboldened by alcohol and ego. I mean, she tries, but it's not like she built anything significant. She divorced my dad, lives alone, just works at the hospital. It's kind of sad when you think about it. I stood there holding a plate of untouched food. The room spun. My son who I'd worked 2 jobs to put through college, who I'd supported through every struggle, who had a house I'd helped him buy, was mocking me, calling me a failure, in front of everyone. I set down the plate, carefully. My hands were steady. I walked over to where he stood, and when he saw me, his face went pale. He knew I'd heard. "Mom, it's okay," I said quietly, smiling. I'd gotten so good at smiling through pain. "Congratulations on your graduation, Connor. I'm very proud of you." I kissed his cheek, said goodbye to Amanda, and left. I drove home carefully, methodically, my mind strangely calm. The next morning, I woke up early and made myself coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and thought about everything, about the years of sacrifice, about working night shifts while taking care of 2 babies, about paying for his education, his opportunities, his life, about the rental properties he didn't know I owned, including the house he lived in. Yes, the house Connor and Amanda lived in, the beautiful 4-bedroom in the prestigious neighborhood that he was so proud of. I owned it. I bought it as an investment property 5 years earlier, before they'd even looked at it. When they were house hunting, their realtor had shown it to them, and they'd fallen in love with it. Connor had called me, excited, talking about making an offer. I'd never told him it was mine. I'd stayed silent while they went through the buying process, while they negotiated with the owner through my property manager, while they closed the deal. The mortgage was in their name, but the deed had always been in mine, held through an LLC I'd created. It was all perfectly legal, all documented, all mine. He had no idea that his success, his beautiful house, his perfect life, it was all built on a foundation I'd provided. And he'd called me a failure. I picked up my phone and made a call to my lawyer. Then I called my property manager. By noon, I'd started the process. Connor's house, my house, was being transferred to a charitable organization, a foundation that provided housing for families of pediatric cancer patients receiving treatment at the county hospital where I'd worked for 3 decades. The foundation I'd been quietly supporting for years. Connor and Amanda would have 60 days to vacate. They'd get no financial compensation. The transfer was a donation, legal and binding. They'd lose their down payment, their mortgage payments, everything they thought they'd invested in their home. When Connor called me 3 days later, screaming and crying, demanding to know what I'd done, I was calm. "You called me a failure," I said simply. "You said I never amounted to much. But Connor, everything you have, I made possible, and you never even saw it. You can't do this. That's our house. We have a child. It's my house. It's always been my house. And now it's going to help families who are facing the hardest moments of their lives. Families who understand sacrifice and love and what really matters. I'll sue you. You can try. But everything is legal and documented. Your lawyer will tell you the same thing mine has told me. You'll waste money fighting something you can't win. There was silence. Then, why would you do this to me? Because you needed to learn something, I said. Because you're 35 years old, and you still don't understand that success isn't just about money and status. Because you needed to know what it feels like to lose something important. And because I spent 35 years giving you everything, and you thanked me by calling me a failure in front of your friends. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. Yes, you did. And Connor, I meant this. I hung up. My hands were shaking now, but not with fear. With something else. Relief, maybe. Or freedom. That was 9 years ago. I'm 64 now, and I haven't spoken to Connor since that phone call. He's tried to reach out a few times over the years. Emails, messages through Brendan, even a letter once. But I haven't responded. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. He and Amanda found another place to live. They're fine, still successful, still comfortable. He didn't learn the lesson I hoped he'd learn, but that's not my responsibility anymore. I gave him every advantage I could. What he does with his life now is his choice. Brendan and I are close. He understood what I did, even if he thought it was harsh. Mom, he said when I told him, I get it. Connor needed to face consequences. But are you okay? Are you at peace with it? I thought about that question for a long time. Am I at peace? Yes. Yes, I am. I retired from nursing last year after 39 years. I spent nearly 4 decades caring for people at their most vulnerable, holding their hands through pain and fear, celebrating their victories, mourning their losses. I was good at my job. I made a difference in thousands of lives. I now spend my time managing my remaining rental properties, traveling when I feel like it, volunteering at the hospital foundation. I see my granddaughter, Emily, occasionally. Amanda brings her by sometimes, separate from Connor. She's 11 now, smart and kind. The house Connor lost is now providing its 7th family with free housing while their child undergoes cancer treatment. I visit sometimes, meet the families, see the difference it makes. That house has served a greater purpose than Connor's pride ever could. Looking back at my life, I see a woman who spent too many years making herself small so others could feel big. I see years of sacrifice that went unappreciated, years of strength that went unnoticed. But I also see a woman who finally learned her worth, who built something meaningful from nothing, who found the courage to demand respect even from her own child. People talk about unconditional love, especially between parents and children. But I've learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just obligation. And nobody, not even our children, has the right to diminish us. I am not a failure. I am a woman who spent her life caring for others while building a security they never knew existed. I am a mother who gave everything and asked for only acknowledgement in return. I am someone who finally learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be treated poorly. My story isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries. It's about teaching our children that success built on disrespect is hollow. It's about remembering that even the quietest people have power, even the most giving people have limits. Would I do it all again? The years of struggle, the thankless work, the moment that broke my relationship with my oldest son? Yes, because it made me who I am. And I finally like that person,